What's up, guys? Your Dreams are here, and we are back with another video. So, for this video, let's try and hit 750 subs with this. And today, what we're going to be looking at is everything you need to consider whenever talking about lane exchanges and how to win them, and just winning the laning phase in general. So, the first thing we're going to be talking about is cooldowns. Knowing your enemy's cooldowns and even your own cooldowns, that's a huge factor in determining who will win lane. So let's look at an example. If you're planning to play aggressive against a Kinetic, since Kinetic's a really good pick right now and everybody's always picking her, and let's say you're playing a Reza in top lane, you want to always know the cooldown for Kinetic's abilities, and especially Kinetic's B dash ability, since it could stun you or she can instantly turn a fight against you. What you want to do is you want to try and bait out the enemy abilities and then keep track of how long they're going to be on cooldown. So in this case, once you see Kinetic use her B ability, you want to think to yourself, this is what you want to be thinking, that okay, now that I know that Kinetic's B ability is down for 15 seconds, I have 15 seconds to try and go in and dive this Kinetic whenever there's an opening, and I know that she won't have her B ability, so she won't be able to run away that easily. And also, another example is, if you're low on health and the enemy has like a Celeste or Kestrel, and they have their ultimate up, it's always important to be careful and watch out for these, and actually always expect them to come at any second. Since if you just ignore small details like what abilities the enemy has, if they're on cooldown or not, it can lead to dumb deaths like that. Instead, you always want to be thinking, where is that Kestrel ultimate, or the Celeste one? And always expect it at the worst moment, and always have a plan to react if it does come. So like, for example, like be ready to like boots or use your reflex block. And this doesn't even only apply to abilities though. This also applies to activatables, since some of those such as Crucible have gotten, and Reflex Block have gotten nerfed in the last patches. So let's look at this. So a Fin Hook cooldown is 55 seconds, and a Crucible has a cooldown of 75 seconds now. Therefore, if you use your Fin Hook and the enemy blocks it with a Crucible, then you know that you'll have your ultimate back up before the cooldown of the enemy Crucible does. So you could use it again and know for a fact that the enemy won't be able to block it with the same Crucible. So keeping track of boots and potion cooldowns is also so important and so underrated in the laning phase. If you just try and dive an enemy, for instance, without taking into consideration if they have potion or boots, next thing you know, they're just going to run away and boots and the turret's just going to end up killing you. Instead, you always want to keep up with who has potion, who already used it, and just keep track of that. So, the next thing we're going to be looking at is range in lane. This is also another huge factor in determining who will win lane, since range applies to both the enemy basic attacks and the abilities. Many people don't use range advantages to bully their opponents, but when using heroes with a long range, you always want to play super aggressive and try and bully the enemy laner. This is why heroes like Adagio are so good at winning lane. Since her range is so big, she could basically attack any enemy without even being in range of the enemy hero. And this causes her to do a fantastic job into heroes like Vox, who have very short ranges. And that's why heroes like Malene and struggle in mid lane, because her range got nerfed so much now that the other mages can just poke from far away. So, for example, if you're being sieged at turret by a Kestrel or Celeste now, looking at abilities, you want to be sure to try and stay out of range of the abilities and stuns, and just dodge as many skill shots as you can. All of this will influence also who you draft for your lane, which we will discuss later in this video. So, we're going to look at items shopped now. Another very important thing is whenever you're dueling somebody in lane, you always want to see what items they have bought. So if you're a Vox in the mid lane and you force a Celeste to recall, you probably want to recall too, because even though a Vox can counter a Celeste, a shopped Celeste will for sure outdamage a counter pick like a Vox. So if you're being outtraded in lane, for example, make sure, like, tier 1 defense is okay. It's not gonna completely screw you over if you buy defense. Sometimes it's necessary. But if you're ahead of your opponents, most people, they like to just buy more offense and play more aggressive and try and pressure the enemy, causing them to lose more CS and possibly even invade if you're very far ahead and want to expand your lead even more. So, if you just mistakenly give out first blood or an early kill, but you don't have enough gold to get a tier 2 like weapon item, you could always get another tier 1 offensive item, such as an extra weapon blade or sharpshooter or something like that, or maybe even a crystal bit or energy battery. Even though this might slow you down from spiking at your first item, it'll make it so that you don't get snowballed by an aggressive laner, since you'll have as much damage. So pretty much, if you don't understand what I'm saying, like if you have like 500 gold and you can't get another item, you could just buy another crystal bit. That'll slow down how fast you get your first ability, but make sure that you don't get bullied in lane too much. And also, you always want to pay attention to what the enemy starts off with in a match. Because, for example, let's say that you're playing in lane and you're like a Ringo and you're up against a Gwen. You always want to look at what items the enemy started off with. So, you know that if you start off with a book, then you have more sustain. So, going for trades will probably be better for you, since you'll be able to regen your health, but the enemy will not be able to regen your health. So you always want to make sure to always look at what you start. And if the enemy has a book, then you know that going for trades will probably be worse, since they'll just be able to heal their health back up. This also applies for CP power, because you always want to pay attention to if they start off with an energy battery or not, since then you'll know if the enemy can stay in lane longer than you, so you could play according to that and recall according to that. So, you also want to pay attention to around the 5-minute mark when the jungle shop spawns, you always want to check the scoreboard. If the enemy hasn't shopped yet, then you could try and play aggressive and force them to recall. But a lot of people, they don't like to recall when jungle shop spawns. So a lot of times you could predict that they're going to go to the jungle shop, and you could try and cut them off or meet them there before they've even shopped. Or just not let them even get to a shop without going through you. And then you could, since you're shopped and they haven't, and you're in the middle of their way to the shop, you have so much more damage than them. So you can easily force them out or get a kill. So, another thing we're going to be looking at is counter building. Even though counter building isn't as big in 5v5, but this is just an example now. If the enemy has a lot of healing, like Lyra, Grace, and Cruel, or some heroes like that, you always want to make sure that your team has some sort of like mortal wound. Because to adapt to these kinds of situations, you might have to change your build or maybe even pick a new one entirely. But it's completely worth it if it helps out your team as a whole. So, another example which I do a lot since I main top lane is if you're up against like a Koshka in jungle and like a Gwen in top lane, I always get an early reflex block, because you know at level 6, it can save your life, since you don't want to get stunned twice in a row, so you have to change up your build and try and get an early reflex block. So, this one's a little bit more minor, but it's something that you have to always keep in mind though. If the enemy is infused, you always want to know when the enemy is infused and when you should infuse at all times. If the enemy is infused and ahead of you in items, it's probably not a good idea to try and trade with them, since they definitely outdamage you most likely. Instead, you would probably just want to try and play passive and clear your waves. But you would also want to not let the enemy do too much with the infusion. And like try not to let them get objectives and just stall them so they waste their 500 gold. And normally you want to infuse if you're ahead of the enemy laner and you want to try and rotate somewhere to take an objective, or if you want a team fight. So, we're going to be looking at last hitting next. The two main ways that I find to get ahead of a laner is either by getting kills or last hitting minions. So in this part we're going to be focusing about last hitting minions and how important it actually is. If y'all didn't see in one of my past videos, which you should check out about lane management, even if you miss just the second smallest minion, you'd lose 45 gold for each minion that you miss. That's the second smallest. Just one minion per wave is worth 45 gold. And there's 2.4 minion waves every minute that come. So if you multiply 2.4 minion waves per minute times 45 gold, which is missing one minion every single wave, that's 108 gold per minute. This 108 extra gold that the enemy laner will get every minute can be used to bully you. And it'll also pressure you more in lane and cause you to miss more minions. so the enemy lead will grow even more. And if you're uncomfortable last hitting with certain heroes, what I would do is I would get a friend and just 1v1 and try to trade damage while last hitting at the same time. For example, heroes like Scarf, Celeste, those are harder, and Kestrel, those are like harder to last hit with. So you just want to go into practice with a friend and then just do this over and over. And it'll help a little bit, you may think, if you aren't doing anything, but the way you're actually going to learn from 1v1s is analyzing why you died or why you missed so many minions and what you could have done better, and then attempt to fix that next time. So, up next, lane management. So I already made a video on lane management. If you didn't know, you should go and check it out. I'll leave a link to it in the description. But the different types of lane management and how to use them pretty much. So you want to try and control the minion wave, which can cause the enemy to miss CS or make it harder for them to get to the minions, like if you ever freeze lane. Another way to use waves to your advantage is by just setting them up for slow pushes, which we talk about in detail in my video, and how to do it. But you could use slow pushing, which is when you have enemy minions pushing onto your side of the map, but you kill all the minions that do the most damage, which are the smaller minions, and you leave only the bigger minions, which do very little damage, and that'll create a slow push for you. And then your team can group up on the other side, and then eventually that slow push will push against the enemy turret, and that'll make one of the enemies either have to lose their turret, or the enemy's gonna have to go and clear the wave. And you could either use this to take an objective on the other side of the map, or you could use this to get a 5v4 situation. So, up next, we're going to be looking about maintaining CS throughout the match. This is the thing that I see most people struggle with in lane, and it's the thing that most people need to improve on, in my opinion, because most people, they don't maintain CS throughout the entire match. And this patch, the laning phase of the game is so short. It's like 7 minutes and you're done with laning phase, and you quickly start to group up and teamfight earlier in this patch. So, most people just put off their CS once the laning phase is over. This is how you get behind in gold, and this is how really good players get so much gold, and you wonder how they just get so much gold. They farm as much as they can, and even when team fights start to happen, they still will go and clear waves in between these team fights, and that puts them ahead of the enemy laner. But you have to be careful, since in the late game, and after the laning phase is over especially, it's so easy to get caught up by the enemy and killed. So it's always best to have a teammate with you or around you and have good vision set up around you, so you know if the enemy's coming for a gank. So, up next, in this patch especially, make sure to rotate, since kills are worth more than CS in this patch. In this patch, the amount of gold that you get from kills is insane, to be honest. Sometimes people get too caught up trying to go for CS and lasting minions that they never rotate and they never try to go for kills. In this patch, a single kill is worth like 400 gold or more, even if the enemy has no kills at all. If they do have kills, it can go up to 1,000 gold for one kill. That is a crap load of gold, because with one kill you could easily get so far ahead of the enemy laner. Even if they have more last hits, you could have more gold. This is why it's so important to rotate for ganks and try to get as many kills as you can. And you want to keep that in mind though, that kills don't win games, objectives do. The kills can help you get so far ahead of the enemy laner, but if you don't do anything with the gold lead, it's useless. So you always want to be trying to invade enemy jungle, take objectives, or push enemy turrets whenever you're ahead. So we're going to be looking at vision now, and predicting enemy movements. Vision and good map awareness is so important to laning phase. If you don't have good vision or good map awareness, it can make your lane very difficult, since you never know where the enemy might be. Also, you want to be aware of where the enemy is at all times. For example, if you see the bot laner and the jungler both missing, you could probably assume that they went to the jungle together, so it's safe to clear and push out lane, you could assume. And also, if the enemy captain is missing, he might be rotating to a bot lane or maybe even the top lane, so it'd probably be unwise to keep on pushing turrets until you get vision of their enemy captain again, so then you know where they are. And using this vision, moving on to the next topic, positioning. In lane, positioning doesn't seem like a huge deal, but it really is, since one thing is, whenever an enemy attacks, your ally minions will start to attack the enemy. This is such an important factor to take into consideration whenever trading, since if you step up too far when attacking the enemy and go into the middle of the minion wave, the minions will deal so much damage to you. Most people underestimate the amount of damage that minions can do, but really they could dish out damage like crazy. That's why it's so important not to run up too far when trying to put damage onto the enemy, and if it's possible, you want to try and kite backwards until the enemy ends up in the middle of your minions, and then they take extra damage since your minions help you win the trade. Also, you want to use positioning based on your vision. So if you have vision inside of your bush, you want to stand closer to it since you actually have vision of it and you know that nobody's coming from there. But if you don't have vision inside of a bush, you probably want to back off and try and stay on the opposite side of there. So if somebody does come to gank you, you have more time to react and fall back to a turret. So we're going to be looking at now what to do if you fall behind in the game and in the laning phase. If you fall behind in gold, and sometimes you know that it's just impossible for your team to win a team fight just because you're so far behind on gold, and then objectives and dragons are starting to spawn, and you don't want the enemy to take it, what you want to do is you want to try and pick off kills on people with a large bounty. If you guys don't know what a bounty is placed on every hero in the match, and once you kill the hero, you actually get a certain amount of gold. This gold will go up for every kill the enemy has and the longer that they've been alive. Therefore, you want to try and group as a team and pick off one hero at a time that has a large bounty and a lot of kills and that hasn't died in a while. This kill can be worth up to 1,000 gold. Imagine 1,000 gold just going to your mid laner. If you do this a couple of times, like 2 times even, your team can easily get back into a match and close gold leads so quickly. In the lane, if you fall behind, you don't want to keep on trying to 1v1 the enemy and losing and giving free kills over. But instead, you would probably want to just try and play more passive, and just farm as much as you can and get as many last hits as you can until you have a teammate that rotates over to help you and you actually have numbers advantage against the enemy, and then you could outplay them. So the last thing we're going to be looking at today is draft and understanding your lane matchup. When in the draft, you always want to consider what the enemy picks and what position they're going to go to. It's always best to learn what heroes counter which heroes. And if you all want a video on that, I'll even make one for it. But you always want to try to counter pick. For example, if the enemy picks a Vox in this patch, you know it's most likely going to be a CP Vox in the mid lane just because of common knowledge. But using that, you could pick like an Adagio in the mid lane if you like that, since you know that Adagio can counter Vox. And sometimes if 2 heroes are played with the same skill, it's just physically impossible to outdamage the enemy, just because your pick is so good into the enemy. That's why it's so important to understand your matchups, and you want to try and outsmart them by last hitting more, rotating better, and trying to get your teammates to come for good ganks. You always want to try and find your win condition in lane, which nobody ever talks about. All people ever talk about is win condition for the entire game, which is very important, of course. But you also want to think about how can you win lane? What will make you win? And like, for example, I straight up can't outdamage this guy. So I know that my win condition is not in lane, is not going for 1v1s. But instead trying to get vision control, that way your teammates can come for an easy gank. And then you could determine it, and that can help you win your lane. But that's going to be about it for this video. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time.